Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Ari, and today we're going to have some more stories about our toxic life. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to my channel, like the video, if you enjoy it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now without further ado, let's go. Today's first story. In this story, OP's had a happy wedding in June 2021, but your wife changed after a few months. She distanced herself from you, belittled you, and you suspected she was cheating. When you confronted her, she admitted to an affair with her boss and wanted to leave you. You exposed the affair, and her boss distanced himself from her. You moved on, found a new life, and are happier without her. It's fortunate you didn't have children together. Now let's get into the story. I really appreciate this community and found it very helpful throughout this process. So I'd like to share a truncated version of my story. My ex-wife and I had been together for about 6 years before we got married last June of 2021. Getting married during a pandemic wasn't easy, but we had a wonderful wedding, and it was one of the happiest days of my life. Fast forward a few months later, and my wife became a completely different person. She opted to go to the office regularly while I continued to work from home. We both worked from home throughout the pandemic. She worked for a big firm, so the longer hours seemed to be par for the course. But she no longer wanted to spend quality time with me on the weekends, spending a lot of time with her horse, and began to downplay my achievements, claiming I was no longer a go-getter, even though I was doing very well at work. People say that the first year of marriage can be hard, so I started taking my wife on regular date nights to reinvigorate our relationship. But she remained withdrawn and judgmental, which was a big blow to my self-esteem. I racked my brain thinking of what I might have done to make her act and feel this way, but I couldn't come up with anything plausible. So I started to lose sleep thinking I was possibly losing my wife to someone else. These were the worst months of my life because I couldn't believe you could lose the person you married so shortly after tying the knot. So I convinced myself it was the pressure of her job that causing her to act this way, and I opted to suppress the negative thoughts to avoid exacerbating the issues we were having. She was actually gaslighting me the whole time, and I just didn't know it. For D-Day, I organized a romantic weekend by the beach, despite my suspicions, in order to try and revive what we had prior to our marriage. I thought this would renew our bond, but she became more brazen with her disdain. I told her I loved her on our way to dinner, and she didn't reciprocate. Later that evening, she had me take an NSFW photo of her in a bubble bath, and when I mentioned that it was a bit too scandalous for social media, she responded, "That's not what I'm using it for." We have been intimate throughout our marriage, but she refused to be intimate with me on this trip. That's when I finally confronted her on my suspicions and demanded she is honest with me. She denied everything for a while, but I convinced her I had proof I didn't, and she finally confessed. She admitted to sleeping with her boss on numerous occasions for months and that he was pressuring her to leave me. I went through a panic attack which I had never experienced before, and after finally calming down, I realized what a fool she was for falling for his lies. I told her I was going to inform his wife, and she responded, "She'll find out, but you won't be the one to tell her." That's when I knew my ex-wife had convinced herself she was going to run away with her boss. It was sick and a little evil, and I realized that my ex-wife was never who I married. The real her was this manipulative and vile stranger. She changed my flight that night, sent me to my parents' house, and told me she would mail me some boxes of my clothes. I contacted the boss's wife via social media as soon as I got to the airport, and that's when all hell broke loose. Long story short, the boss never planned on leaving his family, and in order to try and save his marriage, he distanced himself from my ex-wife as quickly as possible. A pair currently HR had to get involved, and my ex-wife quickly gained a reputation around her office. She cried and pleaded with me to take her back, but I told her she had made the decision and I was just completing her plan. Aftermath success is the best revenge. Life has been good now that the dust has settled. I live near some of my closest friends, met a wonderful woman, and found a great job in California. I'm learning to love myself again and have realized that my ex-wife's opinion of me during our marriage is not a reflection of who I am or my inherent value. I'm truly happier without her, and while I occasionally feel disheartened by what transpired, I feel blessed that this truth came to light before we had kids. Today's second story.
In this story, OP recounts a sad story in which he discovers his wife's infidelity and a positive test result for an incurable STD just before attending a company ball. He finds incriminating messages on her phone, confronts her publicly at the event, and eventually leaves her. The story ends with the wife leaving town with her boss, the husband's clean test results, and the revelation that her affair ended after 5 months. Now let's get into the story. I'll tell you a pretty sad story that happened to me. I hope this never happens to anyone else, but maybe my story can help you if it does. My wife was invited to a company ball. It was really fancy, so ballroom attire was required. 2 weeks prior to the ball, she started to get really anxious about everything. She even asked me if I was sure I wanted to go. She said if I would rather stay home and relax, that would be fine. She usually begged me to go places with her, and if I insisted on staying home, that she gave me a list of chores to do. The fact that she offered me the idea of relaxation was weird. I told her I was going and she could relax about it. When it got close to the day of the ball, my wife was using her phone excessively. She never told me why, and I didn't feel welcome to ask. We were in the car at one point, and her phone connected to the Bluetooth and she freaked out. She started pushing the power button a few times. When the Bluetooth didn't disconnect, her face turned really red and she just started looking out the window. It was so worrisome. What was she so paranoid about me seeing? She went into the store and couldn't have been too paranoid because her phone was laying on her seat. I decided to look through it. I didn't find anything interesting in the texts, so I checked her email, and an opened email said she had test results to see on her doctor's website. I looked and it was a test result positive for an incurable STD. I could not believe what I was reading and the magnitude of what I just found. I wondered if she was planning to tell me anytime soon. We hadn't had intimate in 3 months, the longest we ever went. These results were date it from 4 days ago. Did I have what she had? My mind was reeling when my wife started running back to the car with groceries. I thought I had enough time to check. One more thing. I did a search in her apps for WhatsApp, and boom, she had it. I opened it and saw a string of texts to a man named Michael. The only Michael I knew she was associated with was her boss. I locked her phone and put it on her seat. She got in the car and was relieved to see her phone. She said she wasn't sure if she dropped it and looked at me closely for a few seconds while she tried to figure out if I looked through it. I put on my best poker face and drove us home. We arrived at the ball before I had another chance to check her phone. I didn't sleep with her, and I didn't ask her anything. I wanted to know when she was planning to tell me this terrible news. I already considered the possibility of her cheating on me because I didn't think I had the same thing she did. But I couldn't know for sure until I got tested. Why, unless she was cheating on me, would she hesitate to tell me this diagnosis? All of this was going through my head as we entered the ball. We had seats at a table, which is where my wife set down her little handheld purse. I thought about trying to sneak a peek at her phone. We were greeted by her boss personally. He kissed my wife's hand and told her he was so glad she was there. She introduced me to him unenthusiastically, and he greeted me with the same level of dismissal. He asked me if he could have the first dance with my lovely wife, and I felt like I didn't have a choice. Besides, I wanted to look at my wife's phone while she danced with him. It looked like they were whispering to themselves. It was weird, and I had just about enough. I started looking through my wife's phone without any care if she saw me. I opened her WhatsApp and discovered that Michael confirmed precisely what time we would get here. And scrolling up just a bit more showed that they planned to sneak away. As soon as I went to the bathroom or stepped outside, I'd for a smoke. I looked up at them in shock. They were at the bar getting drinks. Now I looked through more of her messages with him, talking about the intimate they've had and how they want to have it again. My wife even mentioned her recent diagnosis to him, and he apologized for not telling her about it. She freaked out over text, asking him how she was supposed to tell her husband she suddenly had an incurable STD after 7 years of marriage. He offered that perhaps she wouldn't ever need to tell me if she just left me for him. I took screenshots of it all and sent the collection to my phone. Then I used her phone to post it all on her social media platforms. She was friends with people all over this ballroom. I saw people looking at their phone, gasping, and then looking up to find my wife or the boss. I included a few messages of slander towards their coworkers and employees. I watched someone urgently alert the boss to a problem, and he left the ballroom to talk about it. My wife was left alone, so she started walking back towards our table. She looked extremely uncomfortable, like she noticed something was wrong and people were staring at her. I stared at her too, fake smiling with my hands folded in front of me. She greeted me skeptically. I simply said, "I'm going to file for divorce because you are no longer my wife." Her jaw dropped and she sat next to me, asking me what was going on. I handed her back her phone and told her to check what she posted a few minutes ago. She was really confused and looked at me like I wasn't making sense. When she opened her phone, I saw the moment of agony show up on her face. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, her hand covering her mouth. She realized her boss was most likely fired, which meant she would be fired. She realized everyone in the room was staring at her because they now knew, officially not speculating, that she was sleeping with the boss and both of them had an STD. How despicable and disgusting. She ugly cried while she grabbed her stuff and left the hotel, heading for my car. I followed her slowly, nodding in acknowledgement to every person that eyed me up. I had the keys in my pocket and I was not giving her a ride to my house. When I got to the car, she was standing there with her arms crossed. I asked her what she thought she was doing. She said she wanted to get in the car and go home. I asked her if she met her parents' house or her boss' house. She looked at me, shocked and upset. She asked me not to do this and said I couldn't be serious. I said I would show her how serious I was, that she was never coming back to my house or getting in my car again. I unlocked my door, only got in, and locked it again. She was screaming at me to let her in, but it quickly turned to desperate sobbing. A crowd gathered outside the hotel, watching us by our car. They all knew she was the one sleeping with the boss. She was the one with the STD. She gave up on trying to get in the car with me and opted for sprinting into the woods lining the parking lot. I drove home. I didn't care what happened to her anymore. I scheduled a doctor's appointment the next day. It was 3 days later that I got back my test results, which thankfully said I was clean. I also heard my ex's boss was fired. As soon as her boss got an opportunity to sneak away from the intense scrutiny he faced, he packed his bags and left. On the way, he stopped to pick up my ex. They haven't returned to town since then. I put all my ex's belongings outside between 2 tarps. That was more consideration than she ever gave me. However, she never returned for it. My most helpful support through the breakup was my dog. Also heard my ex was dumped by Michael after 5 months.